Okay, fine. Ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you are, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, good something. Uh, and before I get going, there's two things I want to say. The first is to a massively big thank you to Pearson for organizing these spring days, and for inviting me to get started. And the second thing I need to say to all of you is that I hope with all my heart that you and your loved ones and your friends and all the people you hold dear are safe and well. And of course, someone has their microphone turned on, by the way. Of course, we always hope that for all of our friends and things, but most especially now, because I don't really need to say this, but we are living in unprecedented times. Everyone says unprecedented times, the new cliche. And those have meant massive difficulties and dislocations for us. Loss of work, loss of contact, loss of social contact, and all that kind of stuff. And challenges beyond belief, both in personal terms and in professional terms as well. Briefly, before we move on, let's just say that we just have to hope and pray that things will get better, and that all of our poor countries will restore themselves to a way of life that we were used to, or at least, if it's a new kind of life that we can revel in and be happy and comfortable in, where we accept and understand in a way perhaps that we never did before the importance of the people who keep us going, the health workers, the carers, the bin men, the checkout people, the service industry people who make our societies run, and who we have discovered, perhaps in sharper focus than ever before, are so important to our well-being. There's a lot we could say about coronavirus and COVID-19, but I think we'll go straight on, as I say, for the last time, with my good wishes to you and to all of us. This, by the way, is, I think you've seen this. So here we go. Bees or butterflies, teaching online in times of COVID-19. Oh, how I hate that sound. Okay. This is a gentleman who some of you may know or not know. His name was Cassius Clay, but he changed his name because Cassius Clay was a slave name, to Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time. Now, I don't actually like boxing very much, and I'm not that interested in it, but he was such a spectacular star, this man, and he was very quick with words and very funny with words. He boasted and showed off all the time, and that's horrible, except he did it so well. One of his great sayings was, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, hands can't hit what his eyes can't see," because he just said he was the fastest, best boxer in the world. I love some of the things he said. The one that makes me laugh most is this one. "I'm so fast that last night I turned off the light switch in my hotel room and got into bed before the room was dark." It sounded much better when he said it. Forgive me, but it makes me laugh. So what about this stinging and floating? That seemed to me to be a metaphor for where we are at the moment as teachers, in the world of lockdown, in the world of coronavirus, when schools are closed, when we can't go about our normal professional lives in the same way as we have been doing since any of us can remember, really, on a professional level. Why do I call it bees and butterflies? Well, because of the bee. Here's a rather nice bee. Actually, it's doing a lovely thing in this photograph. It's collecting nectar, but bee stings are pretty horrible. And here are the words of one of my students. Now, I teach online at an MA at the New School in New York, and I've been teaching online for some time. And I will refer to that as this talk goes on. Of course, it's not classroom teaching in the sense of teaching a bunch of elementary adolescence or something like that. It's an MA, it's teacher training. But at any rate, as lockdowns started happening across the world, I asked my students to consider what this might mean for us and how they were getting on. And some of them were in shock. And this particular student said, look, she said, I worry about the content retention and the fact that students are getting less exposure to English overall because they aren't hearing it all day the way they were at school. Now, let me explain. This is a teacher teaching in New York at a community college, surrounded by English. And now suddenly they'd all had to move online. And of course, some of that English was lost. And then she said, while they seem to really enjoy the Zoom session, some students have shared with me about distance learning overall that they hate this and they aren't learning anything. And then she said the thing which got me thinking about where we are. It stings to hear that, since I'm trying so hard to still provide some semblance of a meaningful education to them, but I know that we're all still adjusting. I love this particular student teacher because she speaks for all of us. I'm trying so hard to make this work, and she's finding it very difficult. At the other end of the scale are the butterflies. Here's a rather beautiful butterfly. And I went about 2 weeks ago. I've lost track of time. Have you lost track of time? Trying to work out what day of the week is it today? Is it Monday or Saturday? Or, you know, somebody in the UK where I am, I'm in Cambridge, it's a bank holiday, which means that we're all supposed to be on holiday. And you say to yourself, yeah. So, anyway, but at the other end of the scale is someone who isn't stinging. This is a screenshot of an IATEFL general panel for their global get-together about 2 weeks ago. And I'm putting this screenshot up because if you look for it on YouTube, you can watch this panel for free. It's for anyone, whether you're a member of the Teachers Association or not. And it was a very good panel discussing the issue of how we suddenly adapt to teaching online in this difficult reality we face. And one of the questions to these panelists was, what do you miss about face-to-face teaching? And I want you to concentrate on the woman second from left. Her name is Sandy Millen. She works as the Director of Studies at International House in a place called Bydgoszcz in Poland. And when asked about what she missed about face-to-face teaching, she said, I'm surprised how little I miss. I like how I can mix people around. Easier to have snowball fights online. It's surprisingly similar. I miss the staff room, but I still get great student-to-student interaction. So for Sandy, she finds the dramatic change to online, actually really rather beneficial. And that's something I want to return to over the next 5 minutes or so. In other words, like most things that come into education and kind of knock us out of our comfort zone, there are some really big negatives. Let's be quite clear about that. And some teachers are struggling, but it's not all bad. And for some people like Sandy, rather the contrary. She's finding ways of, how can I say, utilizing, taking advantage of the affordances that online teaching can provide. And she's loving it. How wonderful is that? Let's take a step back. Remember, this is what we're talking about today. Is the situation the world is in, well, we know what we feel about that. A complex cocktail of emotions, worry, a bit of fear, uncertainty, a sort of state of limbo for some people, a great difficulty in their personal and professional lives. But in other ways, there are many pluses about what's happening with us now. A discovery of a sense of community, discovery of how we can care for each other. There are some world leaders who aren't shining examples of that, I know. But for many people, we've discovered how much we care for each other, and that's nice. But let's take a step away for a minute from this world we're in, and I want to take you back to this place. Does anyone recognize it? I think you'd be quite clever to recognize it, to be honest. It's some gardens, a street, some rather nice gardens, beautiful trees, a river. No, it's in England. I should tell you that it's in England. Okay, does this help? That is the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in a place called Stratford-on-Avon, in the middle of England. And Stratford-on-Avon is famous for being the town where William Shakespeare was born, Britain's greatest playwright. And it's also the place where I grew up. The two things are not connected in any shape or form, except to say that that's the River Avon, by the way. Someone says it's a lake. It's not actually a lake. That's the River Avon. You may recall that somebody called William Shakespeare the Swan of Avon. So that's the River Avon. And that's the theatre. Anyway, the fact that I grew up there is not relevant to Shakespeare, except to say that I went to every single Shakespeare play every season until I was about 22, and that has informed for me a continuing love of the work of William Shakespeare. But that's another story. Here's another photograph from Stratford-on-Avon. This is Barclays Bank. Now, I think this may be the first and maybe the last time I'll ever mention banks in a conference talk. Not necessarily my favorite subject, though I'm not going to say anything good or bad about them. Why have I put these pictures up? Well, because as a teenager, which, as you can see from looking at me, was 1 or 2 years ago. As a teenager, my father took me to the bank for a great sort of rite of passage, which was to open my first ever bank account. And we went in, and I was introduced to the clerk, and I was given my checkbook. And in those days, which is a long time ago, the only way to get money was to go to the bank with your checkbook where people knew you and draw out money. And if you did that on Friday, if you ran out of money on a Saturday evening, tough luck. There was no way of getting money until Monday morning, when you would have to go back into the bank. If you traveled from Stratford-on-Avon to, say, the biggest city nearby, say Birmingham, which many of you will know, and you went into Barclays Bank in Birmingham, even though it was the same bank, they wouldn't cash a check for you unless they rang through to the Stratford-on-Avon branch and you had identity and stuff like that. It was really, if I think about it now, unbelievably cumbersome and awkward and complicated. And then we had suddenly cash machines in the wall, and everything changed. And now, of course, we've got these. And I don't know about you, but I do all my banking from my phone. It takes no time at all. I hardly ever go into the bank again. I don't live in Stratford anymore. I live in Cambridge. But I hardly ever go physically to the bank anymore. Now, what happened with this? Well, there were a few days along the way of kind of, whoops, how do I do this? Oh, this is new. Oh, I'm not quite sure how that works. A few days of adjustment, but on the whole, it was remarkably smooth and easy, the transition from one way of doing banking through another to another to another. So that now, fairly soon, maybe in some societies, we won't need any cash at all. And it's all happening, and we all take it in our stride, and it doesn't frighten us or shock us. It just is. By the way, in brackets, I understand entirely. I'm talking about a Western European country with an infrastructure which is maybe slightly different some different countries in the world. But you understand my point. Well, I hope you understand my point, that we've been through some massive changes in the way we live and the way technology has come into our lives. And mostly we've dealt with it pretty well, you know. It should be the same with what's happening to teaching now. Suddenly teaching online, but maybe this is different. This coronavirus, this sudden shift into having to teach online or not at all is different. Here, for example, is another of my MA students. Oh no, sorry, this is a teacher from Italy who sent me an email the other day. And she came across a YouTube video I'd posted of a song of mine, and she came across it while desperately browsing the web in search of ideas for not an ugly lesson plan on COVID-19. Big deal. I'll talk a little bit about my singing in a minute for reasons you'll understand. But then she goes on to say, like so many of us ESL teachers, I've had to shift to online teaching overnight without nearly any competencies. That's different. That's different. Nobody had to shift from one form of banking to another overnight without any competencies. It is different. Or is it? This is a photograph I took a few years ago now. In a place called Abbottabad, which is a city in Pakistan. And I was incredibly lucky to be in Pakistan. I had the most wonderful visit with SPELT, which is the Society of Pakistan English Language Teachers. And they do an incredible conference. They have a big conference in Karachi, and then the conference speakers divided into two, in those days, divided into two teams and went to different cities in Pakistan, a sort of traveling roadshow conference, if you like. And here we were in a place called Abbottabad. And I rather love this. We extend a warm welcome to our worthy guest, Jeremy Harmer. It's always nice to be called worthy. And there we are. Modern Age Abbottabad is a school, a secondary school. And here's a picture of some of the boys doing drill or physical activity or something. Slightly nervous of the teacher with a stick, but hey, but it was a lovely place, by the way. And above the teacher, you can see a sort of gallery. And in that gallery was a large room where 250 teachers gathered for my absolutely fascinating talk on absolutely no idea what it was about. I've forgotten completely, and it probably wasn't fascinating either. But so this was some years ago, and because I wasn't quite sure of how technologically advanced Pakistan was in those days, I had everything on my PowerPoint, but I was a bit nervous about whether there would be a projector or the plugs would connect. Or so what I did is I copied all my slides onto overhead transparencies. For the younger ones among you, that's what we used to use before we had digital projectors and stuff. So these little acetates, the overhead transparencies, I copied everything onto those. I cut them into little strips so I could do funny effects and things like that. And I thought how clever I was to have prepared in this way, conscientious, professional. So we got to Abbottabad, to that school I've shown you, Modern Age, and I was in the middle of my talk, about 250 teachers. The projector was whirring away, and there was the screen, and you could see my slides and things like that. And there was also an overhead projector which was lined up to the screen, so that in the event of the projector not working, we could see that, and everything was fine. You know, everything's going fine. Fans like this, and on we were going, and suddenly everything stopped. So I said, "Oh, what's that?" And they said, "Oh, it's a power cut." And I said, "Oh, how long do you think it'll last?" And they said, "Oh, they usually last about a day." And it's at this point that your heart starts to race in a rather dangerous way. I was younger then, so I wasn't terribly worried. But anyway, your heart starts to race. And I swear to you, what I thought to myself was, oh, that's all right. I've got my overhead transparent. No power, no transparencies. And there's that awful moment when the ground opens up in front of you and you think, what am I going to do now? Help! You know, and then, of course, what you have to do is you just have to keep going. So you kind of just keep going. And was it a fantastic talk? No, it wasn't. And was my sudden need to improvise fantastic? No, let's be, if I'm honest, it wasn't great. But I did what you have to do, because it's what teachers do, what we've always done. Teachers are always faced with stuff that they weren't expecting. Things don't work, things go wrong, students do things that are unexpected. And what do you do as a teacher? We're an incredible community like that. Teachers are flexible and adaptable, or they're not teachers. You can't exist as a teacher without being able to, what's that expression? Roll with the punches. You see, Muhammad Ali is still in the back of my mind. Without being able to kind of deal with whatever comes up in front of you. And the story about myself is not a story of self-congratulation. On the contrary, I don't think I dealt with it particularly well. My point of the story is I dealt with it. That's what we do. And how are we dealing with this? We're dealing with it. We're dealing with it. Let's have a think about this online world, this isolated world, this lockdown world. As I said, I do songs. I'm a folk singer when I'm not doing ELT. I do various kinds of music. It's my hobby. Some people are lace makers. Some people are great cooks. Some people go running. Some people are great painters. Some people make models. Some people play cards. Some people, whatever it is that is your hobby, or they play sport or something. In my case, it just happens to be music. So the first 2.5 months of this year, I spent outside the UK. And I had a wonderful time, by the way, in Brazil. But I was really looking forward to getting back. Largely, I didn't particularly want to leave Brazil, but I wanted to get back largely so that I could go back to folk clubs and back to orchestra practice and all that kind of thing, which are my hobbies. That's the way I relax and stuff. And I was so looking forward to that. Wow, after 2.5 months, I'm going to go back into a folk club and, you know, the usual folk clubs, and listen to other people and play songs, and, you know, the camaraderie there is there, and there's a whole gang of people that I know, and so on and so forth. But just as I arrived back, we gradually started to close down. The country started to close down. So I got in touch with someone who was organizing a folk evening that I was supposed to be taking part in. And I said, is our evening still going ahead, or is it going to be cancelled like everything else? And this was the message I got from him. Alas, he said, Brian, his name is Brian Corsten, a wonderful, wonderful mandolin player. Alas, he said, I think it's off, but I'll let you know and inform people tomorrow. So the next morning, while I was sitting at breakfast having my cup of coffee, I got his message, which said cancelled. Well, everything's cancelled, but at the time we didn't know everything would be cancelled. He said, it's cancelled. And what did we do? Within 2 hours, we'd set up a new folk club. We called it Lockdown Folk. And in Lockdown Folk, and we use Zoom. Which is designed for speech, but there are things you can do in the settings to make it more music friendly. We use Zoom, and we do these twice weekly folk clubs. Here is a screenshot of a session we had the other evening. And you can see various performers there. There's a woman there with a harp. She was joining us from Scotland. Next to her is a woman called Jean, who's an incredible, she plays the whistle and the flute, and and there's someone there from Bologna, as it happens, and then 2 or 3 great guitarists. There's a husband and wife team there who sing together, and so we've been running these folk clubs. Why am I telling you about this in an English teaching presentation? Well, I'll tell you, because something extraordinary is happening. And what's happening is that it's not as good as a folk club, but in some ways it's better. Or maybe it's just different. But there have been moments of great stillness and beauty. While everyone else mutes their microphones, we all listen to the performer. So that the woman I pointed out, Jean there, second row end of the line on the right, she just plays a flute sometimes, just a simple tune. And we all listen. And the effect can be startlingly emotional and wonderful. Why is this? And why is it that in the family meetups we have now, in the friend meetups we have now, a different kind of conversation seems to be emerging? Why is that? Well, in another Zoom get-up, this was just a social one, I was talking to 3 of my friends. One of them is called Laura Patsko, who some of you may have come across. At the top is a man called Ken Wilson, who you've almost certainly come across in one form or another over the years. And bottom left is a man called Mark Andrews. And we were chatting about the online world we've started to inhabit, where we all live now. And we were trying to work out what it was about those folk sessions, what it was about the conversations we were having online, what it was that made them not as terrible as we thought they were going to be. And it was something like this. There's a tremendous intimacy about the connection you have with people when you're on Zoom and you're talking. It's tremendously emotional and intense. Now, it's different when it's just me. I'm just talking to a screen. I know you're there because I can see comments coming up and down. I can see lists of names. But on the whole, this is just me talking. So it's not intimate in that sense. But if we were interacting, there would be a tremendous intimacy. The space, it's a different space. We contrasted it with what it's like to go to a conference. Now, I've probably met quite a few of you at conferences, and you go to teachers' conferences. Do you really meet people? Well, yes, there are lots of conversations buzzing around everywhere. Everyone's having a good old chat and a conversation. But you don't have space to really have a conversation with somebody unless you both take yourselves away out of the conference. And I was remembering the first time I met Mark Andrews, the guy bottom left. The first time I properly talked to him at a conference, we had a great conversation, but we had to leave the conference to do it. But when you're on Zoom with a small group of people, you have that space to really talk. There's also the fact that everybody is present. You are there. When you're in a face-to-face classroom, some people are daydreaming, some people are looking out the window, all that kind of thing. Well, that may happen online because there may be, I've got 2 screens here. I could be looking at something else entirely while I'm talking to you, blah, 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 blah. But if you're actually in the conversation, you're present. You're actually there in a way that sometimes our students aren't. And more than anything else, I listen more carefully online than I sometimes do face-to-face. It's a lot easier if you're in a meeting, a teacher's meeting or something like that, face-to-face, and someone's talking and you just don't even concentrate very much sometimes. Or maybe, is that just me? But somehow online that doesn't happen. I think what's going on is some kind of sense of heightened emotion, some kind of sense of something special happening, that in a time when our ability to communicate in the ways that we've done all our lives has been in some ways restricted, we thirst for communication. We yearn for it. And when it happens, you'd say in Spanish, we aprovechar, we take advantage of it, we grab it, and so on and so forth. Isn't it wonderful? Ah. I hope your hearts now are brimming with wonderful sense of community and feeling and love. Well, I shouldn't be too silly. I do think there's a lot of love around in these days of coronavirus, a different kind of love, but it's rather special. Except here's a teacher from Wisconsin. She teaches in a community college. She teaches refugees, immigrants, that kind of thing. And she has suddenly, boom, had to go online, like so many of you. And this is what she says. Just in the transition to online learning, I've already lost some students. So I think it works better for some than others. I guess there's nothing special about that. Every time someone offers you a new activity, it works better for some than others. Some people love the world online, some people don't. Some people love group work, some people don't love group work. Some people love sort of communicative activities, some people don't. I get that. And everything that I say in a talk like this, which is so general, can't be nuanced, and it can't be too detailed because of that. So let's see if we can somehow bring all this together and talk about things that can happen and things that can be better online. And I'm distilling, as I do as a methodologist. I've always seen it as my job to listen to what people are saying and distill it and try and then diffuse it. Is that what's the word? Talk, share what I've heard, if I think it's worth it, to people around the place. So this is what I've found online. It's what I found in this ITEFL conference 2 weeks ago, 2 panels, a talk, and so on and so forth, and many, many discussions I've been having intensely online in the last, because we're in week 7 now of the lockdown here in the United Kingdom. And this is some of the wisdom, not my wisdom, wisdom I've heard from other people. And the first thing is, relax, guys, relax. I don't mean relax, just sit around having another cup of tea. I don't mean that. I mean relax in here. Relax. You know what? You can't know everything. You can't expect to suddenly be the world's greatest online technology teaching expert. It's not going to happen. You can't suddenly know everything that some of the people who've been teaching online for 10 years know. It's not going to happen. Don't stress about it. It's just the way it is. We're all in the same boat. And except for the people with massive experience teaching online, we're all facing the same challenges and the same difficulties. All teaching, a whole teaching career, especially from the beginning and going on, is a whole business of trial and error. We try things out. We try and do what we've been trained to do. We try and do something we've been told about, and we get it wrong. Sometimes we fall flat on our faces. Sometimes it goes really well. Sometimes it doesn't. But what do good teachers do? Good teachers have always said that when something goes wrong, they probably have a sort of, 24 hours of feeling suicidal. But then what teachers do is they pick themselves up and they say, so what went wrong? Why did that happen? Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do that. That's the mark of a good teacher, isn't it? The ability to not just have an experience, but to use the experience to go forward and to make things better. And in terms of suddenly teaching online, you know what? It's going to be rough at first, especially if you haven't taught online before. It's going to be rough. And it's not just you, it's the students as well. Do you remember that teacher from New York? Her students were saying they weren't getting anything from being online. Well, that's not the teacher's fault. And it's not the student's fault either. It's going to be rough at first. It's going to be tough and rough. But you get there in the end. You just have to keep going. And remember, by the way, that you don't have to be an expert in some new technology, some incredible app, some fantastic new thing. We all use technology in our daily lives. We use WhatsApp or WeChat if we're in China and all sorts of other parts of the world, or emails or YouTube or Facebook or not Facebook in many countries, but we all in Instagram. But you know what I mean. My brain, I'm suddenly having a brain, my brain's suddenly emptied, but you know what I mean. We all use these things in our daily lives, so use them in class. Teachers have always done that. Teachers have always taken the things that they like from their lives, and I don't mean their personal lives, and brought it in to their classrooms. We do that again now. Anyway, teaching and learning are just like life, basically. Okay, maybe they're not. Moving on quickly. Oh, by the way, this is Hughes Pearson, for heaven's sake. Pearson, I congratulate you for putting on these spring days. It's wonderful to do such a thing. But they've also got a lovely site there about precisely what I'm talking about teaching in the times of COVID-19, and it's well worth a visit. Thank you, Pearson, very much for that. It's great. Number 2, learning and teaching. I don't know, some of you are old enough to remember what it was like when technology, Web 2, all that kind of stuff first came charging at us from nowhere into the world of English language teaching. Suddenly, I remember so well the first conference I went to where people were giving talks on how to use QR readers and how to use WhatsApp. I saw a sensational talk in the very, very early days of WhatsApp, a sensational talk by someone from Iran about using WhatsApp for teacher development and stuff like that. Wow, 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 wow. The danger, of course, is that some presenters in those days, and indeed lots of articles and things, they threw technology at us. Look at this, look at this, look at this. Whoa, you can do that. Buy this, buy this, buy that. All these wonderful new apps, wonderful new things, wonderful new hardware, wonderful new software, and people got punch drunk on all of this. But the technology isn't the issue. It's the pedagogy that matters. What do you believe about teaching? Then you go searching for technology to find it. I think my very good friend Scott Thornbury, I think always reminds us that just about the only technology that's ever been specifically designed to support a particular language teaching methodology is the language lab, which in its early iterations was specifically designed to support an audiolingual view of teaching. But at the moment, there's so many technological resources around for us. It's the pedagogy that matters. What do you believe in about teaching? What do you believe in? I believe in 3 things. I believe in lots of things, but 3 essential things about teaching and learning. And that is, interaction works. Students learn when they interact. Students learn when they interact with each other, with the teachers, with the texts that they read or hear, with the language around them, with the world around them. Interaction is the key, not just always being on your own. Although, brackets, some people think that interaction is more important for people with a more extrovert kind of personality than an introverted one, but that's a discussion for another day. So interaction is the first thing. Second thing is, students learn better when their brains are engaged, when they are cognitively engaged, when they have some mental activity going on. If you compare that with what happens, you've all seen it when students are only superficially engaged and they sit in front of you with a kind of vacant look on their faces and they go through the motions of doing what you ask them to do, but that's all. And emotional engagement really, really matters too. students learn better when their emotions are engaged, their heart is engaged, when they bring their whole personality with them. Presence, do you remember that word? Presence, being present. So the question for me is, if I'm going to have to teach online, how can I make sure those three things are present when I'm teaching online? Well, how about looking at the activities that I like, that I think seem to satisfy my need for those three things? Can I still use them online? Ouch, that's a difficult question. Well, I've just at random, I just quickly jotted down 4 activities that that I like. There's no particular reason for these, except I just happen to like them, and they were the first ones that came into my head. So, for example, the first activity, you're very familiar with that. This is the when you divide students into 4 groups, and each group gets a separate picture, and they have to look at the picture, discuss it, make sure they understand what's going on in the pictures, and then you, the teacher, go away and you go up to each group and you take the pictures away from them. And then you make new groups of 4 students each. And in each new group, there's one student from one of the original groups, another student from the second group, another student from the third group, and another student from the 4th group. So that in each of these new 4 student groups, each student has seen a different picture. And the task of the group is then to try and work out what story the pictures tell. Now, forgive me for explaining something that most of you sort of learned when you very, very first ever became a teacher. It's not like I'm telling you something very interesting. My point is rather different. My point is, can you do that online? It's easy to do it in a classroom. You can move students around. Can you do it online? Well, yes, you probably can. You just have to find a way of doing it. For example, if you're using a program like a piece of software like Zoom, you can put students in breakout rooms. And that's a wonderful little thing where you put a group of students in this breakout room and then you assign other students to that breakout room. And of course, it's not a physical space. But in each breakout room, that group of students look at the picture. You show them the picture. You share a screen with them for that picture. You set a time limit. And when the time is up, automatically they're reincorporated into the class, and then you regroup them and off they go to all their different breakout rooms again. You don't want to do that because it's too complicated or you don't have that program? Fair enough. I completely understand that. Well, how about you do this? You have to rely on students being honest. Is that the word? Honest? But what you do is you say, right, and you divide your students into 4 groups, and then you say, right, I want everyone to close their eyes, except for Group A, and then Group A opens their eyes, and you show them a picture by sharing your screen, as I'm doing now, or maybe just by holding up the picture here in your hand to the camera. And then everyone closes their eyes again, and then you do the same for Group B, Group C, Group D. I don't want to go on about it. It's not that great an activity, but it's an example of how all you have to do is just not be frightened of, I'm talking about myself, by the way, not be frightened of the technology, just saying, okay, there must be a way around this. Actually, it's dead simple. Holding up a thing and the other people shut their eyes is the simplest thing. Teachers have been doing it for years. You can do that online. True, I can't see whether you're closing your eyes, my dear students, but I just have to trust you. What about quizzes? Number 3 there. Well, for example, in the online MA that I teach on, we've been using quizzes for years. you can do that in any online environment with different kinds of quizzes and different resources for quizzes and so on and so forth. But I don't know whether this has happened to you, but in my country, well, no, not just in my country, but around the world, people have been doing quizzes online. And some people have been coming up with complex technological fixes to how you put people in teams and they answer questions and things like that. My brother decided to do a family quiz, and he just said, I can't be doing with all that. So what did he do? He just said, look, I'll divide you into teams. So this is a big family kind of group, and he divided us into 2 teams. And this is team 1, team 2, and I'll ask team 1 a question, and we can all hear you talking. And then after a minute, it's all finished. And if they get the wrong answer, then team 1 can answer. And if they answer within 10 seconds, they get a point. I'm really boring you now. I do apologize. But my point is, it's not that wasn't that difficult for him to think that. And he chose, if you like, a low technology solution rather than doing something clever with the technology. About a year ago, in a wonderful Pearson event that I had such pleasure being a part of, I did a talk, and for the first time in my life, I got the participants, I gave them a poem, and I said, you've got 8 minutes to learn this poem by heart. And I set the timer on my phone, and when it was over, it went beep, 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 and that's when we stopped. It was extraordinary. It's a poem that nobody in the room had ever seen before. It's called Everybody Sang, and I could not recommend it more highly, by a man called Siegfried Sassoon. There's a long question here, but we'll have to, I'll deal with that hopefully in a bit. And in 8 minutes, most people learnt the poem, or a good bit of it. By the way, it's such an old-fashioned activity. It's a fantastic learning activity. The concentration on English, the repetition in people's heads as they say it in their brains or out loud, or they try and do it again, the absolute cognitive and emotional engagement with the words in the text, all that kind of stuff. It's a great activity, and it's wonderful when everyone in the room is trying to do it. Surely you can't replicate that online. Well, yes, you can. What do? You show a poem, you leave it on the screen for 8 minutes, and then you take it away. And then you see if anyone can say the poem back to you, and so on and so forth. Laura Edwards, who's a teacher who lives and works in Düsseldorf in Germany, talked about how the chat box, far from being just something extra, is actually a massive advantage, especially for students who aren't good at instant conversation. Because if you give people time to write their thoughts and write them, and then after the time is over to bring the chat into the general sphere, then you've given people a lot of good thinking time. Oh, and by the way, thinking time in teaching is the greatest cognitive moment that students ever have. That when you give students time to think of their answer, they do an awful lot, very good things happen in their brains. What about classroom management, though? Well, it's difficult online. Well, so what? It's difficult in class. Classroom management is a massive subject. So if you're going to teach online, you need to establish protocols. How do people say they want to speak? How does the teacher quieten the class down? How does someone say they've finished the turns and that they've stopped speaking? How do we do all those things? Well, each teacher has their own ways of doing this, but the basic thing is to establish rules. And as it says in the brackets, as students, except that it shouldn't say as students. Oh my God. It should say ask students. Okay, I'm going to go away and shoot myself now. There's a misprint in my presentation. Oh, hell. Anyway, get the students to say, how are we going to do this? Help me out, dear students. How are we going to make this happen? What are the rules? How do we do this? How do we do that? Use everything you have and you're comfortable with. You can hold up signs. You can do this. You can get students to do this. The teacher in Wisconsin who I mentioned made me laugh a lot, because she had one or two students who were being a bit difficult and disrupting the online environment. But in the program she was using, they have to be in a waiting room until the teacher brings them in to brings them into the online learning environment. So when students get a bit rubbish, she just puts them back in the waiting room and lets them cool down and calm down. And then she brings them back, and hopefully they will have stopped disrupting the class. A point that has been made repeatedly is that teachers need lots of encouragement to teach online, but so do students. They find it difficult. The idea that students are kind of online masters and mistresses is rubbish. Some students are the best gamers, what do you call them, in the entire universe, but most of them aren't. And they need encouragement. Explain how things are happening. We talked about chat room writing already. Get them to, and by the way, we talk to students and try and support them, but online gives you a massive opportunity to get students to help each other in a different way from the way we do in class. So tell students to reach out to other students, talk, if you're worried about a student, find a student who's sympathetic and get them to find out what's going on, because they don't have to do it in public in front of the class. They can do it in a sidebar, or they can get in touch with the student between lessons and talk to them. Let students hang out without you. And then finally, on this particular issue, what we learned in our online MA is that a judicious use of the carrot and the stick really works. In other words, the carrot, the incentive, the medal for students is we have these incredible discussion boards. The more you talk to each other, the better it is. The stick, you get graded for your participation. It's as simple as that. Now, I've just made a very silly mistake that I didn't realize. I was getting so excited by my words that I completely screwed up what I was trying to tell you, and it's all to do with Laura Edwards, the teacher in Dusseldorf. Earlier on, I was trying to tell you, but I moved on to a different point, about her incredible use of a very common technique in an online teaching online, where you invite a guest speaker into the class. And what she did was she built a whole repertoire of activities which you can do online using writing and swapping and documents and all this kind of thing, where the students had to write an invitation for the speaker, they had to plan the questions for the speaker, then they had to interview the speaker online. And by the way, it's much easier to get a guest into your lesson online than it is to get them to come physically into your lesson, because they can do it from their kitchen or their office, in my case, or wherever it is. And then they had to write up reports, and then they had to write thank you letters and so on. And that was an example of an activity that we all know about, but which is actually in some ways better and easier and more appropriate online than it is face to face. And you will please forgive me for screwing that up, because I meant to talk about that in a different category. Right, nearly finished. Oh, by the way, yeah, I just put them up there. If you are teaching students who are not adults, as far as possible, bring the parents in. Bring them not into the lessons, but explain to parents what you're doing. Explain to them how you're trying to make it work. Explain to them what you expect from their sons and daughters, and so on. And explain to parents what they might be able to do to support the work that you are doing. And that would be great. There's so much more I want to say, help, and I'm running out of time. The most important thing is no, everything is important, but a really important thing is for us to reflect when we teach online and it goes well or badly. More than ever, it is important for us to work out what happened, why it happened, what we would change next time around, and so on. The really important thing, and this brings us right back to the idea of the huge pluses of living in a lockdown world, the ability to share with our staff room, because we need virtual staff rooms, but not just our staff room, with teachers all around the world, with teachers from our school, teachers from our city, teachers from our country, teachers from around the world. Just share and talk and express our doubts and our fears and our successes and so on and so forth. Absolutely important to do that, because online communication is what really, really matters. And in this lockdown world we've got, online education or online communication has proved to be much more important and much more compelling and emotional than we ever thought possible. So there we are. Bees, butterflies. Are you on an adventure, or are you living a nightmare? I don't know, but I do know that most teachers are absolutely amazing. Our ability, not ours, your ability to adapt and to roll with it and to keep going never ceases to amaze me. I've observed so many lessons in my time, and the teachers that I admire are the ones who deal with what happens in front of them, and that's what teachers are doing. Here are finally 3 resources I recommend hugely. One, of course, is the Pearson site that I mentioned already. Have a look there, and that will take you to other lovely places. If you want to watch the panel I mentioned, type IATEFL Global Get Together final panel into YouTube, and there it is. And I mentioned Sandy Millen before, one of the speakers at that conference. Her blog site is an absolute goldmine of information, especially now, about teaching online. And by the way, she also has a guest blog post from Laura Edwards, who I've also quoted, so I couldn't recommend that more highly. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow teachers and everything, I'm almost running over, but I don't know whether we'll have time for a question or two. But so far, thank you so much for listening to me. Charlie. Thank you. Thank you.
Recordings will also be sent out to the email address you registered for the session with. Thank you. So over to some questions, Jeremy.
Yeah, sure.
This is quite apt. Is it a modern twist to the situation we're in, or a rather permanent state in education?
I think it's a very interesting question, and one which all of us are talking about. Where do we go from here? When the lockdown restrictions happen, will we go back to school? What teachers in my country are saying is, how do you keep social distance in school? Because the government, my government, is saying, well, we can gradually let students go back to school, but they'll have to keep, apart from each other. And as most teachers say, you must be joking. Students don't do that. Primary kids, you're going to keep them a meter apart, 2 meters apart. Secondary kids, it's not going to happen. So we don't know if that's going to work. In the case of private language schools, it may well be, and there is some evidence for this, that some students are beginning to see, wow, actually, learning online is pretty good, because I don't have to fight the Sao Paulo traffic or the Mexico City traffic or the Madrid traffic or whatever it is. I don't have to travel. I can. It's not that inconvenient. Maybe the big online revolution that people have been predicting will happen. If I had to guess, and this is really stupid of me to even say this out loud publicly because I'll probably be completely wrong. I suspect that what this will do is to change the balance of things in teaching. I believe that people will still want to be in the same physical space as other people. We like it. But I think we'll back that up with a lot more online work. And I think teacher training will change to incorporate training for online teaching. But they're just guesses.
Brilliant guesses they are, Jeremy. Thank you. Next question. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned so far from your online experience?
Well, oh, okay, that's a really good question. And for me, it's not a new one, but when I first became involved in online teaching, I didn't do it out of a great passion or sense of wow. It was largely because I thought, well, if I'm going to continue to be a teacher trainer, if I'm and a sort of MA level trainer and teacher, I'd better embrace this new world of online teaching. This was about 12 years ago when this was all very new, and the New School in New York was setting up one of the first online master's courses there were, and I approached this with considerable unease, but a sort of sense of personal of obligation to myself. And the one thing I knew beyond any doubt was that discussion would not work online. Because what is discussion? Discussion is when people are sitting around in a classroom and so on and so forth. But what we do at the New School is we have asynchronous discussion. It's not actually, most of the time it's not spoken, it's written. The result, and our students are in different parts of the world, different time zones. So they don't necessarily have to all, and this is Laura Edwards' point about writing, they don't have to all buzz, buzz, buzz at the same time. What happens is that a student posts an opinion, says something, and things like that, and maybe they're in I don't know, maybe they're in Spain, and it's only later that the student from Kobe in Japan reads what they've said, and then they have time to think about what's said, and they answer, and they type up their comments, and it goes like that. And what I discovered then, that I'd begun to forget until coronavirus happened, is some of those discussions were just as good, if not better, than the kind of classroom discussions you sometimes have in teacher development. Different, but fantastically powerful. And we're discovering all that again, I think, now. Better? No, different.
Good stuff. Two more questions then.
Sure.
We've had a couple of questions come in regarding how to assess online. The first thing I'll say is that we have a webinar next week on the 13th, which is about assessing online. But perhaps your take, Jeremy, please.
Okay.
You usually evaluate your students online.
I need to preface this by saying that I am not an assessment specialist. Like all teachers, I've prepared students for tests, I've prepared tests, all this kind of thing, but I'm not great at this, and I suspect that the webinar coming up on assessment will be infinitely more useful than any answer I could give at this point. I think the only thing I can say is relax. There are ways of doing it. Can you stop students just copying things and doing each other's work? I don't know. But what you can do is give clear instructions. Try and do some of it instantaneously. Try and do some of it during the lesson so that students have to submit what they do whilst they are right there. And so they therefore can't just pass off someone else's work as their own. And to set very clear tasks and have them send them to you as your lesson is progressing. That seems to me to make sense. But as I say, I hate to admit to ignorance, but I think I should probably need to in this particular respect.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was a great bit of advice you got there. Ready for the last question?
Yes, sure.
With the modern technology and adaptation we see around the world for learners happening today, will what will the role of the teacher look like in the future, Jeremy? Was that clear?
Yeah, absolutely clear. The reason I'm sitting here looking like somebody's hit me over the head with a wet fish is because that's a really big question. I think I've got two answers. The first is sort of reference to something I was saying earlier. The first is not that different in the sense that everything that we believe about teaching, our support for students, our care for students, our attempt to foster interaction, our attempt to engage them, our attempt to get their brains involved, that doesn't change because we're online. We just have to find ways of using the online environment to do those things, which is that whole point. And Pearson is doing a lot of work on this, and I think they've got some events planned about how to, it's the pedagogy, not the technology, that matters. But the second part of that question is to say it's not the same, it's different, if you understand me. And in that respect, the role of the teacher, if we are to continue down this online world, and if it's become an equal player or even a superior player in educational provision, then teachers need to be better purveyors of technological expertise. I don't mean they need to be tremendously good at sophisticated programming or something like that, but just to be very comfortable and used to the things you can do with the whatever software you're using. And that may be a bit of a difference. But to sort of spool right back in a sense, we send children to school to learn things, and in our case to learn English. But we also send children to school to be things, to develop, to be things, to grow as beings. And I don't see that changing. And to go back to the first question you asked me, I'm pretty certain that students will not stop going to a physical school as soon as we can do that. But it's a adventure or nightmare. I don't know. I guess it depends on our mindset. All I can say, if that was the last question, was that the last question?
Yep, I think so.
Well, all I can say once again is I wish you, all of you, well, all of us, the very best for a peculiar future, which my best hope is that my two best hopes are, one, that you get through this unscathed, and that we get through it with a renewed appreciation of how important we all are to each other. And that's teachers and teachers, teachers and students, parents and children. It's a wonderful world we live in.